The screen lights up, and there she Island Goldie Hawn, with that unmistakable golden hair and laughter that once seemed to spill out like sunlight, dazzling audiences across decades. To the world, she was the eternal ingenue, America's golden girl, the woman who seemed to have been born to sparkle, dance, and light up every room she entered. But at 76, the woman behind the glow tells a very different story, one written in heartbreak, loneliness, and battles that most never imagined she fought. When Goldie first burst into Hollywood's consciousness in the late 1960s, she was like a shot of pure joy in an era suffocated by war, protests, and disillusionment. Her quirky charm and the delightful giggle she carried like a secret weapon made her irresistible. From her breakout on Rowan, Martin's Laugh-In, to her Academy Award-winning performance in Cactus Flower, Goldie was seen as unstoppable, a star destined not only for fame, but for immortality. Yet, behind the curtain, even as the applause roared, her heart was carrying scars that fame could never erase. Born in 1945 in Washington, D.C., Goldie Hawn grew up the daughter of a dance school owner and a musician. From an early age, she learned to dance, to smile, to perform not just on stage, but in life. It was her way of surviving in a home filled with tension and a world where she never truly felt safe. Though she would later describe her upbringing as ordinary, she often revealed, in quieter moments, that she never felt fully seen, never fully heard. The performance began long before Hollywood noticed her. As she rocketed into fame, that performance hardened into a mask. Hollywood adored her for being bubbly, naive, and endlessly optimistic. But Goldie was no fool. Beneath the wide-eyed characters she played, she was a sharp, intelligent woman who struggled with the very image that made her famous. And while the world celebrated her as a symbol of joy, inside she often felt consumed by fear. Fear of failure, fear of abandonment, and fear of losing control over her own story. The irony is almost cruel. A woman who made millions laugh struggled so deeply with sadness. Goldie battled depression long before the media ever began to discuss mental health openly. She has spoken in fragments about lying in bed, paralyzed by despair, wondering if life had any meaning at all. The very world that cheered her on stage could not hear her silent cries once the cameras stopped rolling. She became another tragic example of how Hollywood rewards the mask but ignores the person beneath it. Her personal life, too, was no fairy tale. Behind the glamorous headlines of love affairs and red carpet appearances were failed marriages, fractured relationships, and nights filled with tears rather than champagne. Her marriage to dancer Gus Triconis crumbled. Her union with musician Bill Hudson ended in bitterness and estrangement, leaving her children caught in the crossfire of Hollywood's unforgiving glare. Goldie's romantic partnership with Kurt Russell, though often celebrated as one of Hollywood's rare enduring love stories, was not without its own storms. For every picture-perfect magazine cover, there were private battles the public never saw. But the tragedy of Goldie Hawn's life is not simply in broken love or depression. It lies in the cruel contradiction of being a woman who gave joy to millions while struggling to find peace within herself. The world adored the fantasy of Goldie Hawn. Few stopped to ask who she really was. Even fewer cared to hear the answer. By the time she turned 76, the shine of her Hollywood stardom had dulled, and the loneliness of age began to press down on her shoulders. The industry she had once carried now seemed to forget her, shifting its gaze to younger stars with brighter lights. For a woman who had spent her life defined by applause, silence can be deafening. She retreated from the spotlight, rarely appearing in films, and instead poured herself into charity work and raising her family. To some, this seemed like a graceful retirement. To others, it felt like Hollywood had cast aside one of its brightest treasures. Yet the greatest heartbreak, perhaps, lies in how often Goldie herself confessed she never felt truly happy. Fame, money, love, they came and went. But happiness, that elusive companion, seemed always out of reach. She once admitted that she cried almost every day during her early success. Imagine that. While the world laughed at her comedic genius, she was weeping backstage. That contrast between what we saw and what she lived cuts to the core of her tragedy. The story of Goldie Hawn at 76 is not simply one of decline, but of revelation. The tragedy is not only in what she endured, but in how invisible those struggles were to a public that thought it knew her. Hollywood crowned her a queen of comedy, a timeless beauty, an eternal optimist, but behind the golden smile, she was a woman battling shadows that no camera could capture. And so, as we begin to peel back the layers of her story, the question emerges: what does it mean to be loved by millions, but feel unloved within yourself? How does one carry the weight of being everyone's sunshine while drowning in their own storm? At 76, Goldie Hawn's tragedy is beyond heartbreaking, not because her career has faded, but because the mask she wore for decades is finally slipping, and the world is only just beginning to see the cost of that golden smile. This is the story Hollywood never wanted you to hear. The late 1960s were a chaotic time in America. The Vietnam War, civil rights protests, and generational divides defined the nation. And then, almost as if summoned to soothe a fractured world, Goldie Hawn appeared on television, her face painted with daisies, her body swaying to psychedelic rhythms on Rowan, R.N. Martin's Laugh-In. She was sunshine personified in a time of shadows, a comic force who could disarm anyone with her giggle, a laugh so pure it felt like a healing balm. Almost overnight, she became a national obsession. Hollywood loves nothing more than someone who embodies hope during dark times, and Goldie was quickly swept into the whirlwind of stardom. Her breakout role in Cactus Flower, 1969, proved she was more than a pretty face with a bubbly demeanor. Playing the role of Toni Simmons, she stunned audiences with a blend of innocence and depth that earned her an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. At just 24, she had joined the elite ranks of Hollywood royalty. But success at such a young age is rarely a blessing. For Goldie, it was a gilded cage. The Oscar that should have signaled freedom instead became a lock. Studios saw her as the eternal ditzy blonde, the giggling girl next door. She was typecast, boxed in by an image she didn't fully control. Producers wanted the sparkle, not the substance. And so, Goldie's intelligence, her sharp wit, her ambitions beyond comedy, was often dismissed or ignored. The more she tried to break free, the tighter Hollywood held her. In interviews from that era, she would laugh off the roles, leaning into the caricature. But those who looked closer could see the cracks. Behind the laugh was a young woman who often spoke of anxiety, who admitted to crippling self-doubt. Fame had placed her on a pedestal, but the higher she climbed, the more fragile she felt. It's a paradox faced by many stars, adored by millions, yet profoundly alone. Her career skyrocketed throughout the 1970s and 1980s, with films like Private Benjamin, 1980, which not only showcased her comedic genius, but also her business acumen. She produced the film herself, a bold move in an industry where women rarely had power behind the camera. The movie became a massive success, earning her another Academy Award nomination and cementing her as more than just a Hollywood sweetheart. She was a trailblazer. Yet even this triumph came with a price. Goldie was constantly fighting a system that doubted her. Every victory was hard-won. Every step forward met with resistance from those who believed she should just smile and play dumb. Her personal life mirrored the turbulence of her career. Marriages to Gus Triconis and later Bill Hudson collapsed under the weight of fame and personal discord. With Hudson, She had 2 children, Oliver and Kate, both of whom would grow up to become actors themselves. But the relationship was poisoned by bitterness, and after the divorce, Hudson became estranged from his children. The rift scarred the family, leaving emotional wounds that would haunt Goldie for decades. She often carried the guilt of being unable to shield her children from the chaos of her romantic failures. It was during the mid-1980s that Goldie's life seemed to find stability with Kurt Russell. Their partnership, unconventional and unwed, became one of Hollywood's longest-standing relationships. To the public, they were the epitome of enduring love, raising their blended family with laughter and resilience. Yet even here, the shadows lingered. Goldie, who had long struggled with depression, admitted that even in moments of love and companionship, she often felt an unshakable emptiness. The tragedy wasn't that she lacked love, it was that love itself never quite healed the deeper wounds. As the years passed, Goldie's star continued to shine, but never without effort. She had to constantly reinvent herself, battling ageism in an industry obsessed with youth. Roles that once came easily began to dry up. Scripts diminished in quality. The bubbly blonde image that had once brought her fortune now worked against her. Hollywood, cruel and relentless, rarely allows women to age gracefully. For every wrinkle that appeared, every year added to her age, the offers shrank and the spotlight dimmed. Goldie, who had once been the face of American optimism, found herself fading from screens, replaced by younger actresses who carried the same sparkle she once did. Yet, what makes Goldie's story particularly heartbreaking is not the fading of fame, something inevitable for all stars, but the way she internalized the rejection. In private reflections, she confessed to feeling forgotten, invisible. For a woman whose very identity had been tied to being seen, being adored, this erasure was devastating. She retreated further into philanthropy and her spiritual pursuits, establishing the Hawn Foundation to teach mindfulness to children. It was meaningful work, yes, but also a way of seeking the happiness she never found in applause. Still, the loneliness clung to her. Friends described her as warm, generous, and filled with light, but also as someone who carried a sadness she never fully shook off. It is a cruel irony. Goldie Hawn, the woman who taught a generation how to laugh, could never escape the weight of her own tears. At 76, her story is not just one of fading celebrity, but of the human cost of becoming a symbol. Goldie was never allowed to simply be herself. She was demanded to be Goldie, the perpetual ray of sunshine, the woman who made the world laugh while silently crying. The Oscar, the fame, the wealth, they brought comfort, but never peace. And perhaps that is the heart of her tragedy. Goldie Hawn's life, dazzling as it seems, is a cautionary tale of what happens when the world worships your smile but ignores your soul. The applause fades, the cameras turn away, but the shadows remain. She once said, in a rare moment of unfiltered honesty, "People think I'm always happy. The truth is, I'm not." In those words lies the devastating reality of Goldie Hawn's journey. A woman who gave her life to making others laugh, only to spend much of her own existence searching for the very joy she gifted to the world. By the 1980s, Goldie Hawn had become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Films like Private Benjamin, Overboard, and Bird on a Wire showcased her comedic timing and box office appeal, while also proving she had the range to carry both slapstick and heartfelt drama. To the outside world, she was unstoppable, a woman who had conquered an industry notoriously unforgiving to women. Yet as the cameras rolled and audiences laughed, Goldie was quietly carrying burdens far heavier than any script could capture. Her Oscar win for Cactus Flower had been both a triumph and a curse. It validated her as an actress, but also chained her to an image she could not escape. Hollywood continued to see her as the bubbly blonde, rarely offering her the kind of serious roles that her male contemporaries enjoyed. While Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro dove into gritty, layered performances, Goldie was repeatedly asked to giggle, flirt, and dance. She fought back by producing her own projects, but even then, she faced skepticism. Studio executives doubted her ability to lead beyond comedy, and critics often downplayed her accomplishments as luck rather than skill. This dismissal took a toll on her spirit. Goldie had always been sharp, business-minded, and deeply reflective. Yet the world insisted on keeping her locked in a caricature. The very traits that made her unique, her intelligence, her ambition, were overlooked because they did not fit the fantasy Hollywood wanted her to be. And in time, she began to believe the limitations imposed on her. Depression crept in, whispering that maybe she was not enough, that maybe she would never be taken seriously. Meanwhile, her personal life was unraveling. After the collapse of her marriage to Bill Hudson, Goldie was left to raise Oliver and Kate largely on her own. The divorce was bitter, with accusations and hostility spilling into public view. Bill Hudson would later claim he had been pushed out of his children's lives, while Oliver and Kate openly described their estrangement from him. For Goldie, the situation was heartbreaking. She had fought to protect her children, but in doing so, the family was fractured beyond repair. The public only saw the glamorous single mother, but privately, Goldie carried the guilt of a parent whose children grew up with a broken bond to their father. Her relationship with Kurt Russell offered stability, but it, too, was complicated. Though they built a life together that spanned decades, their decision never to marry became a constant source of speculation. To some, they were the perfect Hollywood couple. To others, they were a reminder of Goldie's unconventional approach to love and family. She often spoke of valuing freedom, of resisting the constraints of marriage. Yet behind those words was also a woman who feared being trapped, abandoned, or hurt again. The battles of her past had left scars too deep to fully heal. As her children grew older, they began to carve their own paths in Hollywood. Kate Hudson, in particular, rose to stardom in the early 2000s, following in her mother's footsteps with a bubbly charm that drew immediate comparisons to Goldie herself. But even here, the joy was laced with pain. Kate often spoke of Kurt Russell as her real dad, while publicly distancing herself from Bill Hudson. The fractured family history continued to cast long shadows. Goldie, though proud of her daughter's success, lived with the knowledge that her children's pain was partly born of the choices and heartbreaks she herself had endured. The tragedy deepened in the 1990s and 2000s as Goldie's career began to slow. Hollywood's cruel obsession with youth left little room for actresses over 50, no matter their talent or legacy. Scripts stopped arriving as frequently, and when they did, they were often insulting caricatures, grandmothers with no depth, comedic side characters with no substance. For a woman who had once defined an era, the invisibility was crushing. Goldie withdrew more and more from the industry, focusing instead on philanthropy and her personal life. To outsiders, it looked like she was retiring gracefully, but to those who knew her, it was another quiet heartbreak. She was not stepping away by choice. She was being pushed aside, and yet, even as her public presence faded, the private battles raged on. Depression remained a constant companion. Goldie had long studied Eastern philosophies, practiced meditation, and built her foundation to help children develop mindfulness. But even as she preached the importance of mental health, she admitted that her own struggles never fully disappeared. She once said, "I wake up sometimes and just don't want to move. I have to fight myself to find joy." For a woman whose very identity had been built on joy, this confession was devastating. The world continued to see Goldie Hawn as the eternal optimist, the woman whose smile could light up a room. But those closest to her knew that behind the smile was a woman haunted by loneliness. Friends described her as deeply spiritual, endlessly generous, but also as someone who carried sadness like a shadow. Fame had given her everything: wealth, recognition, power, and yet it had stolen the one thing she always craved: peace. By 76, the cracks in the golden facade were undeniable. The Hollywood system that had once worshipped her had moved on. The family she had fought to protect remained scarred by estrangements. The depression she had battled since youth never fully released its grip, and the laughter that made her a legend was, in many ways, the very mask that prevented people from seeing who she truly was. The tragedy of Goldie Hawn is not just that she suffered, but that she suffered invisibly. She was celebrated for her joy, but punished for her pain. The world adored the image, but few cared to know the woman. And now, as time moves forward and the cameras turn elsewhere, her story is left as a haunting reminder of how Hollywood builds idols only to abandon them, how it rewards masks but neglects souls. Goldie Hawn was, and remains, a woman of immense light. But at 76, the shadows of her life tell a story that is as heartbreaking as it is human. For decades, magazines and entertainment shows presented Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell as the fairy tale couple who had somehow conquered Hollywood's curse of broken marriages. Their love story, which began on the set of Swing Shift in 1983, was held up as a beacon of endurance in an industry where relationships often disintegrated within months. Goldie and Kurt raised their blended family, her 2 children from her marriage to Bill Hudson, and their son, Wyatt Russell, with laughter, traditions, and a sense of stability that few Hollywood homes could claim. But the truth, as always with Goldie, was more layered than the glossy covers suggested. While their bond was undeniably deep, Goldie never hid her ambivalence toward the institution of marriage. She had been burned too many times, scarred by broken vows and bitter divorces. Marriage is just a piece of paper, she often said, and for her, freedom was as essential as love. To many, this sounded defiant, even romantic, but behind the words was also a quiet fear. A fear of losing herself, of once again surrendering control to a system or a person who could hurt her. The tragedy was not that she and Kurt lacked love, but that even love, enduring as theirs was, never erased the emotional weight she carried from her past. As the years passed, another adversary began to emerge: time itself. In an industry obsessed with youth, aging is treated not as a natural process, but as a scandal. For actresses like Goldie Hawn, once celebrated for their beauty and vitality, the mirror becomes both a truth-teller and a cruel enemy. She often spoke candidly about her struggle with aging, admitting that Hollywood no longer had a place for women like her. The scripts slowed to a trickle. The phone calls became fewer, and the same industry that had once crowned her its golden girl now acted as if she no longer existed. Goldie tried to embrace this new chapter by stepping away gracefully. She poured her energy into her foundation, supporting mindfulness and education for children. She traveled, she meditated, she sought solace in spirituality. To the outside world, it looked as though she had chosen peace over fame. But in quieter moments, she revealed the sorrow that accompanied her retreat. "When you've been adored for so long, it's hard to feel invisible," she admitted in an interview. That invisibility was the cruelest cut of all. Fame is intoxicating, but its absence can feel like death. The loneliness of aging in Hollywood was compounded by her struggles with mental health. Depression, which had shadowed her since youth, did not disappear with time. In fact, it often deepened. Goldie described mornings when she would wake with dread, the weight of despair pressing so heavily that even getting out of bed felt impossible. She had access to therapy, meditation, resources most could only dream of. But depression is not rational, and it does not discriminate. It haunted her, mocking her legacy. reminding her that no amount of applause could cure the emptiness inside. Kurt stood by her through these storms, but even he could not banish them. Partners can provide love, support, and understanding, but they cannot climb inside the darkness and erase it. And for Goldie, the darkness was always there, waiting behind the smile. To the world, she was still radiant, still glowing on red carpets. To herself, she was often just surviving. That is the heartbreaking duality of her life. The golden mask, and the shadow beneath it. Her relationship with her children remained bittersweet. While she was deeply close to Kate Hudson, who became almost her mirror in Hollywood, the estrangement from Bill Hudson cast a shadow over the family. Oliver Hudson, too, carried scars from his father's absence. Goldie tried to protect them, tried to shield them from the chaos of her past relationships. But children see more than parents realize. They inherited her laughter, but also her wounds. Family photos showed smiles, but underneath, fractures remained. Goldie lived with the knowledge that no amount of love could fully mend those cracks. As she entered her 70s, the roles offered to her were almost insulting. Hollywood reduced her to stereotypes: grandmothers with no dimension, comic relief with no dignity. She turned many of them down, unwilling to participate in her own erasure. When she finally returned to the screen in Snatch 2017, it was celebrated as a comeback, but the film itself fell flat, criticized for its weak script. The narrative quickly shifted from her triumph to questions about whether she still had it. This is the cruelty of Hollywood. Men age into gravitas, women age into obsolescence. The irony was stark. Goldie Hawn, who had built her career by defying expectations, now faced an industry that refused to see her as anything but a relic. And so, she withdrew further, focusing on her grandchildren, on meditation, on causes that mattered to her. Yet, even in these moments of personal fulfillment, she often confessed to a lingering sadness. The applause was gone, and though she had always insisted she did not live for fame, the silence left a void that nothing else could quite fill. At 76, Goldie's tragedy is not a single event, but a lifetime of contradictions. She was the woman who made the world laugh while battling depression. The woman who preached freedom but was haunted by fear. The woman who had enduring love yet still carried loneliness. And perhaps most tragically, the woman who gave joy to millions but never fully found it for herself. Her story is a reminder that Hollywood does not nurture souls, it consumes them. Goldie Hawn was not destroyed by scandal or addiction, as so many of her peers were. She was undone, instead, by invisibility, the slow erasure of a woman once celebrated as a symbol of light. The cameras moved on, the applause faded, and she was left to reckon with the question, who is Goldie Hawn when the world no longer cares to watch? The answer, as painful as it is, lies not in the films, the awards, or the headlines, but in the silent moments, the mornings of despair, the nights of loneliness, the quiet acknowledgement that the golden girl was never as golden as the world believed. This is the cruel truth of her 76 years. A life lived under the spotlight, but often in the shadows. As Goldie Hawn stepped further away from Hollywood's relentless spotlight, her legacy began to take shape, not through the roles she played, but through the paradox of her life. For generations, audiences remembered her as the effervescent girl who could turn pain into laughter. Yet, behind that laughter was a woman who carried the scars of broken marriages, estranged family ties, and the silent weight of depression. At 76, her story became less about the career she built and more about the human cost of being America's eternal golden girl. Her daughter, Kate Hudson, has often spoken of her mother's duality, the woman who nurtured her at home while simultaneously battling her own storms. "My mom is sunshine," Kate once said, "but she has her shadows." It was perhaps the most accurate description anyone had given. Goldie's legacy, then, is not just cinematic. It is deeply personal, etched into the lives of her children and grandchildren. She was a mother who gave her children freedom to be themselves, but also a mother whose own broken relationships shaped their identities in painful ways. The shadow of Bill Hudson's estrangement loomed large, creating wounds that even decades later remained unhealed. For Goldie, the guilt was a constant reminder of the ways in which personal tragedy bleeds into family history. Yet, despite the fractures, Goldie's influence radiated through her children's successes. Kate Hudson, with her own charm and resilience, carried the torch into a new era of Hollywood. Oliver Hudson carved his path in television, while Wyatt Russell blended his parents' legacies with a career in film and television. Goldie's resilience, her humor, her determination, all of it lived on through them. And yet, so too did her sadness, the inherited weight of growing up in a home where love was abundant but stability was fragile. Her legacy, then, is complicated, one of inspiration, but also of generational scars. In Hollywood, her impact remains undeniable. Goldie Hawn was one of the first women to successfully transition from actress to producer, breaking barriers in an industry that sought to confine her. Private Benjamin was not only a hit, but a landmark moment in cinema history, proving that female-driven comedies could succeed without relying on men as the central force. She blazed a trail for women who came after her, showing that an actress could be more than a face on the screen, she could be the mind behind the scenes. Yet, even as she fought for respect, her accomplishments were too often dismissed or forgotten, overshadowed by the giggles that had made her famous. This is the cruel irony of Goldie's tragedy. Her greatest contributions were sometimes erased by her own image. The very mask that made her famous became the prison that kept her from being fully acknowledged. The industry loved her as a symbol but neglected her as an artist, and as time moved on, she was gradually written out of the narrative of Hollywood's great pioneers, remembered more for her smile than her substance. Her philanthropy offered another dimension to her legacy. The Hawn Foundation, founded in 2003, focused on teaching mindfulness and emotional intelligence to children, helping them build resilience in a world increasingly dominated by stress and disconnection. For Goldie, it was more than a project. It was a mission born out of her own struggles with depression. She wanted to give children the tools she herself had never been given, the ability to confront sadness without being consumed by it. In many ways, this was her most profound legacy. Not the films, not the awards, but the hope that the next generation would not suffer as silently as she had. Yet, even in her philanthropy, the shadows lingered. She spoke often about how mindfulness saved her, how meditation gave her a lifeline, but she also admitted that the darkness never fully left. "It's always there," she confessed. "You just learn to manage it." To hear such words from a woman the world had always associated with joy was heartbreaking. It revealed the truth of her existence. Joy and despair, intertwined, inseparable, each defining the other. The world may remember Goldie Hawn for her roles in Overboard, or The First Wives Club, for her laughter on Laugh-In, or for the glamorous love story with Kurt Russell, but the deeper truth is that her story is a cautionary tale. Hollywood built her up as a symbol of eternal youth, only to cast her aside when time did what time always does. She became invisible in an industry she had once defined. Her tragedy is not a scandal splashed across tabloids, but the quiet cruelty of erasure, the heartbreak of being remembered for what she was rather than who she truly islanded. And yet, there is resilience in her story too. For all the pain, all the loneliness, Goldie Hawn never surrendered entirely to despair. She fought for her children, she fought for her career, she fought for her sanity. She survived in a world that has destroyed countless others. That survival, in itself, is part of her legacy. She may not have found the peace she longed for, but she showed others how to keep moving even when peace feels out of reach. As she stands at 76, her golden hair silvering with age, her laughter quieter, but no less luminous, Goldie Hawn remains a symbol of contradictions. To the public, she is still the golden girl of Hollywood's past. To herself, she is a woman who has endured heartbreaks that never made headlines, who has fought battles invisible to those who adored her. Her tragedy is beyond heartbreaking because it reveals the truth we all try to avoid, that joy and pain can exist in the same breath, that a smile can hide a lifetime of sorrow, and that even the brightest stars carry shadows. In the end, perhaps this is the legacy of Goldie Hawn, not just the films, not just the laughter, but the reminder that behind every performance lies a human being, fragile, wounded, searching. Her story is not simply a Hollywood tale. It is a human one, universal in its pain and its resilience. And that, more than any award or role, is what history will remember. Hollywood, ruthless in its obsession with what is new, had turned its attention to younger stars. The golden girl of yesterday became a nostalgic reference point, a smiling face in retrospectives and tribute reels. For the millions who had grown up watching her, she was still a cherished memory. For the industry, she was a chapter closed. For Goldie herself, the silence was deafening. She had spent a lifetime feeding off the energy of performance, of applause, of being seen. And now, the cameras no longer turned her way. The invitations to major films grew rare, and when they came, they were often insulting in their simplicity flat roles, written as afterthoughts. She turned them down, unwilling to become a caricature of herself. But with every refusal came a deeper question. If she was not Goldie Hawn, the actress, then who was she? Identity, long tied to performance, became fragile in the face of irrelevance. Her days became quieter, spent in the company of Kurt, her grandchildren, and the inner circle of friends who had weathered decades alongside her. She found solace in cooking, in nature, in the rituals of meditation that had long been her lifeline. The Hawn Foundation continued its work, teaching children how to navigate emotions in a world as chaotic as the one she had once escaped into performance from. And yet, even in these acts of purpose, she often admitted to a hollow space inside a longing for the girl who had once danced across television screens with daisies painted on her face, unburdened by the weight of legacy. The cruelest tragedy of these years was not scandal, nor the fall from grace that so many of her peers endured. It was invisibility. To age as a woman in Hollywood is to be erased in slow motion. The irony was sharp. Men her age were still celebrated, cast in roles of wisdom and power, while she was cast aside. Interviews with Goldie in recent years reveal her quiet frustration with this double standard, though she often cloaked it in humor. But the pain was real. For a woman whose identity was tied to being visible, the silence felt like abandonment. Depression, her lifelong shadow, did not leave her in these later years. In fact, it often grew heavier. The stillness of retirement left her with too much time to think, to remember, to ache. She spoke candidly about waking up with dread, about mornings that felt unbearable. Even surrounded by family, even wrapped in Kurt's steadfast love, the emptiness persisted. The tragedy was not that she lacked love or comfort. It was that even love and comfort could not reach the deeper places of her despair. And yet, despite the weight, Goldie fought on. She turned to spirituality more than ever, embracing mindfulness, meditation, and the belief that one could transcend pain through awareness. She poured her heartbreak into teaching children resilience, perhaps hoping to save them from the silent battles she herself had endured. It was noble, even heroic, but it was also a reminder of how much she had suffered, that her life's mission became ensuring others would not suffer as she had. Her relationship with her children and grandchildren became the centerpiece of her days. Kate, Oliver, and Wyatt often spoke of her with reverence, calling her a guiding light. Her grandchildren, unburdened by the weight of fame, saw her simply as Grandma Goldie, a role she cherished. In their laughter, she seemed to find a measure of peace, a reminder that even if Hollywood had moved on, her legacy lived on in flesh and blood. Still, even these joys were complicated. Estrangement from Bill Hudson lingered in the background, an unresolved wound that time did not fully heal. Goldie carried it quietly, but it was there a reminder of love lost, of family fractured. The press occasionally caught glimpses of her, often walking hand in hand with Kurt, smiling for cameras. To the public, she seemed unchanged, still radiant, still glowing. But behind the photographs lay the truth. A woman at war with herself. A woman who had given joy to millions but often struggled to feel joy in her own skin. It is this duality that defines her tragedy, the ability to project happiness while privately carrying sorrow. As she looked back on her career, she expressed gratitude, but also regret. Gratitude for the opportunities, for the laughter, for the impact. Regret for the roles she never got to play, for the ways Hollywood diminished her, for the years she spent performing happiness she did not feel. She once said, "People think I'm always happy, but I cry too. I always have." In that admission lies the essence of her story. The Golden Girl was always more complex than the world allowed her to be. At 76, Goldie Hawn's life is a testament to survival, but also to the quiet devastation of being misunderstood. Her tragedy is not defined by scandal or downfall, but by the cruel erosion of identity, the loneliness of depression, and the bittersweet knowledge that the world loved her mask more than her truth. And yet, even in this sorrow, there is something profoundly human. Goldie Hawn's story reminds us that stars are not immune to shadows, that laughter can be both genuine and a shield. That beauty and fame do not protect against loneliness. Her golden smile will forever be remembered, but those who look closer will see the tears behind it. As the curtain draws on her public life, what remains is not simply a filmography or a love story. What remains is the haunting image of a woman who gave the world joy while quietly asking herself, "Who will give it back to me?" When the story of Goldie Hawn is told, it is rarely framed as a tragedy. To the casual observer, she is the perpetual Golden Girl, the actress who never lost her sparkle, the woman who defied Hollywood's divorce curse with a love that endured, the mother who raised a dynasty of actors. But when we look beyond the surface, when we allow ourselves to see past the smile, what emerges is not a fairy tale, but a portrait of resilience forged in sorrow. At 76, her story becomes not about the roles she played, but about the pain she carried, the silence she endured, and the questions that remain unanswered. Goldie's career gave her everything: wealth, fame, and immortality on screen. Yet, it also took from her in ways invisible to audiences. It took her privacy, it distorted her relationships, and it left her battling depression in the shadows. The woman who made millions laugh was often unable to laugh herself. That contradiction, the luminous star who felt dim inside, is the essence of her tragedy. It is not the headline scandals, but the quiet devastation of a life lived in performance, even off stage. The heartbreak of her story deepens when we consider the silence that surrounds her now. Hollywood, once intoxicated by her light, rarely speaks her name anymore. Younger generations know her more as Kate Hudson's mother than as the groundbreaking actress who shattered barriers. This erasure, subtle but undeniable, is its own kind of cruelty. To give decades to an industry only to be forgotten by it is a fate that few could endure without bitterness. Goldie carries it with grace, but the sorrow is there, lingering beneath her reflections. And yet, her legacy cannot be erased. It lives not just in the films, but in the lessons her life teaches. She showed that women could be more than ornaments in Hollywood, that they could produce, lead, and redefine what comedy looked like. She showed that resilience is possible even in the face of depression, that survival itself can be a triumph. And she showed, through her foundation, that even the most broken hearts can still strive to heal others. Goldie's tragedy is profound, but so too is her endurance. What remains unanswered are the intimate questions of her soul. Did she ever find the happiness she longed for? Did the love of Kurt Russell, the laughter of her grandchildren, the quiet of meditation finally give her the peace that fame never could? Or did she, even in her most joyful moments, feel the tug of sadness that had followed her since childhood? We may never know. Perhaps even she never fully knew. The human heart is too complex, too contradictory, to ever be neatly resolved. In the end, her story mirrors the very films she once starred in, part comedy, part drama, part heartbreak. She embodied the paradox of being adored by millions, but still yearning for something more intimate, more real. And that is why her tragedy resonates. It is not about Hollywood alone. It is about the human condition itself. How many of us wear masks, smiling to the world while hiding our own storms? How many of us are loved publicly but feel unseen privately? Goldie Hawn's story is not just hers, it is ours. At 76, the tragedy of Goldie Hawn is beyond heartbreaking because it strips away the illusion of the golden girl and reveals the woman beneath. Fragile, flawed, searching. It is a reminder that joy and sorrow can coexist, that survival does not always mean healing, and that even the brightest lights carry shadows. And so, the curtain falls, not with a scandal or a dramatic downfall, but with a quiet truth. Goldie Hawn was both sunshine and storm. Her legacy is not just the laughter she gave us, but the reminder that behind every golden smile lies a story of survival, heartbreak, and humanity. In the echo of her laughter, we hear both joy and pain. In her silence, we feel the weight of invisibility. And in her life, we see the haunting truth of Hollywood itself. It creates idols, but it rarely cares for the souls inside them. Goldie Hawn's story will never be fully told, because the deepest parts of her heart were never meant for the stage. But perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps her tragedy should not be tied neatly into a narrative, but left as it is unfinished, unresolved, deeply human. For in that unfinished story lies the essence of her life. Light that flickered, shadows that lingered, and a woman who, even in her pain, never stopped trying to shine. This is Goldie Hawn's legacy, and it is one that, beyond the heartbreak, will endure.